Good morning. Good afternoon. Welcome and thank you for participating in our workshop. Our presentation takes about an hour. Then we're here for another 45 minutes to receive and answer questions. And we also want your feedback on the items that we present. Please feel free to email your questions at any time. Another slide in a few minutes will show you how to email those questions and your feedback. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Mary Boyd, Senior Engineer with the State Water Board in the Municipal Stormwater Unit. And next, I'd like to introduce our staff who are helping with this workshop. Next slide. This is a photograph of the Municipal Stormwater Unit. But today we have staff from the Municipal Stormwater Unit and from the Office of Public Participation. Together we are presenting and we are working behind the scenes to provide this workshop to you. I'd like to introduce the staff. First, I'll introduce the Stormwater Unit staff. When I call their names, I'll ask staff to unmute and introduce themselves. Starting with the Municipal Stormwater Unit, Paul, please unmute and introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. This is Paul Levy. I'm an environmental scientist with the Municipal Stormwater Unit, and I'm leading the Phase 2 reissuance effort.
Jaime, please unmute and introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Fabila, environmental scientist in the Municipal Stormwater Unit, and I work on the trash implementation program.
Kyle, please unmute and introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kyle McNeil. I'm a scientific aide in the Municipal Stormwater Permitting Unit.
Sheena, please unmute and introduce yourself.
Hi, this is Sheena Dillon. I'm Water Resource Control Engineer under the Municipal Stormwater Unit, helping out for today's meeting.
Jenny, please unmute and introduce yourself.
This is Jenny Shannon, Municipal Stormwater Permit Unit, leading the Caltrans permit.
And Rachel, please unmute and introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Rachel Del Porto. I'm an engineering aide in the Division of Water Quality, providing technical assistance.
Now with the Office of Public Participation, we have Haiti.
Hi, I'm Haiti Yunamine with the Office of Public Participation.
And Jenilyn.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jenilyn Guzman with the Office of Public Participation.
Thank you, everyone. Now I'd like to introduce our workshop facilitator, Diana Messina. Diana is our Chief Engineer for Surface Water Permitting. Diana, take it away. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Mary, and everyone else. So, hello, my name's Diana Messina, and I am your facilitator for today. Welcome to our stakeholder workshop that staff is conducting during the development of the proposed statewide NPDES Phase 2 permit for municipal stormwater discharges from small communities. Thank you for joining us during this period when the State Water Board continues its work through remote communications. This is the second workshop of 4 workshops that were previously scheduled to take place prior to the shelter-in-place order. Mary and her staff were going to travel throughout the state to discuss issues that pertain to Northern California, Central California, Southern California, and issues specifically in the Los Angeles area and to the east of Los Angeles. We are now working remotely. However, the presentations will be the same. We will be gearing our comments and discussions to assure we capture issues more prominent to the different areas of the different workshops. So this workshop is specifically for Central California, even though we can have participants from throughout the state and a lot of the information applies statewide. However, we will be a little choosier when it comes to the comments and questions that come forth to make sure we respond to the comments and questions that pertain to permittees or proposed permittees in the Central California area. Also, our staff will make sure that we highlight certain issues that we know are important to permittees within the central area of our state. Today, we're hosting this meeting virtually from Sacramento. As State Water Board staff, we recognize the traditional territory and homelands of the Maidu, Miwok, and Nisenan people in the modern city of Sacramento. We know they're still actively working to stabilize their livelihoods and preserve their way of life. We equally honor the groups that have experienced economic, environmental, and social disadvantages as a result of historic marginalization. We know that we are meeting during a very challenging time. We recognize the impact this global pandemic has had and will have on our communities across California. Next slide, please. Okay, we're doing our best to make sure that everyone can participate in an effective way and that this time is valuable to you. Here are some guidelines and logistics for our meeting today. This workshop is being recorded and webcast. This is an informal discussion. As staff, we will not be providing written responses to questions, and there will be no formal actions taken based on any of the information you're providing to us today. Questions will be answered to the best of our ability. There will be a 15-minute break at 2:15, and we will be reconvening at 2:30 to start up our comments and question time period. If you would like to stay connected and involved in this process of developing this permit, please consider signing up for the LIRIS email subscription, which is available through our State Water Board website for further updates. Next slide, please. The purpose of today's workshop is for us staff to share information on changes which are under consideration for the proposed reissuance of the statewide Phase 2 permits. We are here to answer any questions and definitely to listen to all comments that you have of us. During our staff presentation, we will explain the permit development process and the State Water Board public process, and where the State Water Board considers adoption of a draft permit. We will be presenting changes that we are examining and looking forward to proposing to our board, as well as to all the stakeholders involved when it comes to improving the existing permits. Some changes that we're presently considering involve updating the permits per current regulatory requirements that were not in place when this existing permit was adopted back in 2013. We'll also be presenting some regulatory options that we are thinking through as we consider proposing to enroll school districts, public school districts, and community colleges into the proposed permit reissuance, actually making them permittees. We will also be explaining how we plan to further implement the existing statewide trash provisions. After our staff presentation, we will take that 15-minute break I was talking about, and then we will reconvene, and we will be looking at all the comments and questions that have been emailed to us and working our way through that together with you. Next slide, please. So on this slide, we basically have the instructions for how you as a participant can submit questions and comments. On the presentation in the webcast, you also have a banner that shows how you can submit questions and comments. We do ask that as you listen to our staff presentation, whenever something pops up that you'd like to say, please submit it through email. The email address to submit your questions and comments is that on the very top bullet of this slide, DWQ, which stands for the Division of Water Quality, phase 1 MS4 Wrkshp at waterboards.ca.gov. Please include in your subject line small MS4 workshop number 2, as this is the second of 4 workshops. And please provide your name, your agency's location, agency or organization, and who you represent, and then your comments and questions. If you are experiencing any kind of technical difficulties, either with the webcast or anything else, please email Rachel. We have Rachel dedicated solely to help you out with technical issues at this second email at the bottom of this slide. All right, oh, now I see it's the same email address. And just make sure that the subject line states technical assistance. All right, next slide, please. So with that, I am handing over the mic to Kyle McNeil. Kyle, take it away.
Hi, thank you, Diana. This is Kyle McNeil, and today I'm going to give a bit of a background on the regulatory framework as well as the permit itself and kind of where it fits into water quality regulation. So first, what is an NPDES permit? NPDES stands for National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, which was authorized by the Federal Clean Water Act. And the permit we're talking about today, the Phase 2 small MS4, is an NPDES permit. And so this regulation was enacted to protect water quality, to maintain beneficial uses, and beneficial uses can be anything that benefits the public, from fishing, swimming, drinking, to other recreational uses. And an NPDES permit provides an authorization to discharge to waters of the United States and is valid for 5 years or until the permit is reissued. Next slide, please. So what is an MS4? MS4 stands for, or shorthand, for Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. And that is a system of conveyances that are owned or operated by a public entity, designed or used for collecting or conveying stormwater. And so in the picture you see on the right side of the slide, it can, in a city, it could be something like the streets and the gutters that transport that stormwater and then out into maybe a local water body nearby. But it can also be something that you don't automatically think of, like on a county road, a ditch on the side of the road, like a man-made ditch. That would also potentially be part of a MS4. And so we have 2 types of permittees in the MS4 permit. We have traditional and non-traditional. So traditional is permittees that you probably think of like a municipality or a county, and then non-traditional are the ones that don't quite fit into those, such as federal prison or hospital complexes, military bases, universities, community colleges, fairgrounds. And so because they may have more specialized purposes or different kind of parameters, their requirements may differ than traditionals. And so we try to focus a little bit more on that. Next slide, please. So here's kind of a bird's eye view of the history of stormwater regulation. In 1972, the Federal Clean Water Act was amended. And then in 1987, stormwater regulation was identified as an important source of water quality that needed to be regulated under the NPDES program. 3 years later, Phase 1 MS4 regulations were enacted, and so this focused on the largest entities, such as medium and large MS4s. And then in the last year of the decade, 1999, phase 2 MS4 regulations are enacted, which increased the scope of stormwater regulation to include smaller entities. In 2003, the state of California adopted the phase 2 MS4 statewide general permit. And so this expanded a bit more on the details that U.S. Environmental Protection Agency provided us. In 2013, the permit was readopted and given more details on specifying and then in 2017, this permit, our existing permit, was amended to include total maximum daily load requirements, as well as trash plan informational orders were issued. And my colleague Jaime Favila will be talking more about trash provisions later in this presentation. And so then that takes us today in 2020, and we're hosting these workshops in order to get feedback from one of you stakeholders to hear your questions, comments, and concerns on changes we're considering. And then once we've incorporated your feedback and gone through a few more of the permit process steps, we anticipate maybe in late 2021, the proposed phase 2 MS4 statewide general permit will be reissued. Next slide, please. So this is what a rough outline of our permit development process. Because we want to hear feedback from you all, please keep in mind that this schedule is still evolving. Depending on your feedback and how we can incorporate that into the permit, the schedule may be extended to include more workshops, public hearings, and drafts. So please definitely send us your feedback. We value it and appreciate it and incorporate it. So our outreach began back in 2018, and in the past year, the State Water Board has been working on the permit language and drafting a permit reissuance. Today and tomorrow, we're having preliminary stakeholder workshops, and then in the coming months, we will incorporate your feedback that we hear today into the draft permits. And then late this year, we will release that draft and begin a 45-day public comment period. And at that point, during the public comment period, we will be issuing formal written responses. Today is just an informal discussion. Afterwards, a public hearing before the State Water Board will occur. The State Board hearing will consider adoption of the proposed permit, and supposing the State Board approves and adopts the permit, then the permit reissuance will go into effect. So that's it for me on the brief background, and I will hand the presentation over to Paul, who is our lead on the permit reissuance.
Thanks, Kyle. So I'm going to give an overview of some of the high-level kind of topics that we're talking about considering changing in the permit reissuance. So first of all, we're doing some reorganization and clarification, which if you're familiar with the permit, you probably already know that there's lots of parts of it that could be made a little easier to read and just clear what the provisions are actually looking for. We're also adding in trash provisions to help complete the requirements from the trash amendments that the State Board passed a few years ago. We're considering including public schools and community colleges and looking at different options for phasing them in and different ways to incentivize the school districts to work more closely with the municipalities that they're located within. We're looking at increased integrated pest management requirements, possibly expanded industrial and commercial facility inspections for traditional MS4s. And then in the post-construction section, we're considering allowance for offsite compliance and, again, trying to make some major clarifications to definitions and possibly changing some of the exceptions. So for reformatting and reorganizing, this is just an example. If you can't read the text, that's okay, because all I'm trying to illustrate here is that on the left side is the existing permit, And on the right side is kind of an example of the structure we're going for in the new permit. And so hopefully you can see what I'm trying to do is break up some of these large kind of paragraphs of provisions that might have 2 or 3 provisions in there, and break those out into their individual parts so they're all citable, and there's not 2 or 3 requirements all bunched into one place. We're also moving away from this task description and implementation level sort of organization that is in the existing permit. We found that was sometimes misleading because the task description would kind of be more than a description and actually have specific requirements in it. So we're moving away from that and basically just trying to spell everything out a little better. And when there's long lists, trying to break the lists up so it's just more readable. So next, I'm going to do a quick overview of the 6 minimum control measures, just because they'll be pertinent, because I'm going to go through each one and talk about changes we're making to each one. If you're already an existing permittee, then you should be familiar with these. And if you're new, then you'll soon be familiar with them if you get brought into the permit. So in the federal regulations for Phase 2 permits, it sets out these 6 minimum control measures, which are sort of different programs that all Phase 2s must include at one level or another. And then within each one, it sets kind of absolute minimums of what those have to do, and then it does leave some room for interpretation for the states to decide exactly how they're going to require the Phase 2s to implement all of these. So the first minimum control measure is illicit discharge detection and elimination, which has to do with making sure that only stormwater is going down the storm drain, and any other kind of discharge that shouldn't be in the storm drain, that is an illicit discharge. Then pollution prevention and good housekeeping has to do with making sure any kind of outdoor maintenance activities or areas where work is done outdoor or outdoor storage areas are all done in a way that doesn't expose things to stormwater that could lead to more pollutants getting in there. Construction site runoff control means making sure that anytime there's a construction operation going on that's exposing the soil, which is more erodible when it's being changed for construction and doesn't have the kind of grass and other things holding it in place, it requires you to take actions to make sure that that soil stays on site. Then post-construction stormwater management deals with when a new building is built or when an existing building is remodeled, or there's any other kind of exterior work that going forward, these new buildings will have low impact development stormwater controls in place to meet certain water quality and runoff quantity requirements. And then finally, there's public education and outreach and public involvement and participation. And so what these minimum control measures have to do with educating the public within your jurisdiction about how their actions can affect the stormwater, and then how that stormwater can affect the water quality in the local water bodies, and then providing them opportunities to be involved in the process of creating and implementing your stormwater program. So that includes making sure that the process is transparent and that the public is invited to any kind of planning steps that are going on, and then also actually providing them participation opportunities such as like beach cleanup days or things like that. So now I'm going to go through each one of those and talk about what things we're planning on changing from the existing permit. So for public education and outreach and public participation and involvement, one change we're considering, just an organizational change, is combining these into one section, just because the education, outreach, and participation, in some ways, the participation opportunities also serve as an education and outreach opportunity, and they kind of just go so hand in hand, and it made sense to kind of include them all in one section. And then another change we're talking about is moving some of these staff training sections, which are currently under public education, into their respective sections. So for example, staff training on illicit discharge detection and elimination would now be under the illicit discharge and elimination, detection and elimination section, instead of being kind of mixed in with the public education. In the illicit discharge detection and elimination section, we are considering expanded industrial and commercial inspections. So the way the existing permit works, you are required to identify priority areas that are supposed to be more likely to have illicit discharges, and that includes industrial and commercial areas. But then, the current permit even requires you to have a list of specific facilities in those priority areas that could be potential sources of pollution, but then it kind of stops there. And it has you do inspections on some of these areas, but then you're kind of left hanging with this list of facilities. So one thing we were thinking about trying to implement was having some kind of stormwater inspections of these industrial and commercial facilities that have been identified. And maybe not to the same extent that phase one permittees have to do these kind of inspections, but we're thinking that there are already several different programs in most municipalities that have to go out and inspect industrial and commercial areas for different reasons, and we're hoping that thinking that there's a way to maybe incorporate a stormwater element into those. So ideally, it wouldn't have to be a whole new inspection program, but that stormwater could be also looked for while doing other sorts of inspections at these types of facilities. Another change that we're considering for this section is simplifying the dry weather flow sampling requirements. So in the existing permit, the language kind of makes it sound as if anytime you observe water coming out of a pipe when it's not raining, that you have to sample that and test it for this range of things and compare that to like an action level table. But really, we're trying to make it more straightforward and say that that's really only required if you can't otherwise determine what the flow is and stop it. So the only need for sampling these dry weather flows is if you don't know what they are and you can't, stop them. So as far as I know, I think that's how a lot of people have been implementing the current permit, but we just wanted to make it clear that that's what we expect. And we're also planning on moving some of these. There are several large tables in that section that also make it kind of hard to read. And we're planning on just, referring to a guidance document, which I think the existing permit already does in a footnote. And I think that those tables in the permit right now are basically just taken straight out of that guidance document. So instead, we're either going to move those to the fact sheet or just refer back to that guidance document and try to make it easier to read and understand that section. Another organizational change here is that we're discussing combining the spill response and illicit discharge response plan requirements. So when reading through what's required, there's one section that talks about having a plan to address illicit discharges and another section that talks about having a plan to address spills. And while those two would probably require different responses, they are sort of on one large spectrum of things getting into the storm drain that aren't supposed to be there. So for example, you could have some kind of illicit discharge that is a hazardous material, but maybe you're not quite calling it a spill yet, or you could have a spill of non-hazardous material. Basically looking through the provisions, it kind of just made sense to combine these into one plan. And I've already seen some examples of permittees that have put these two plans into kind of one document. And I guess I also want to clarify, we're not suggesting that you have to go back and administratively change your documents. If you do have two separate plans now, they could still meet all the requirements, but just organizationally trying to lay out what we want the permittees to have, we're planning on putting these into one sort of section. For pollution prevention and good housekeeping, one thing that we've been discussing is asset management, and I know that that's kind of has been a hot topic in stormwater lately, and several of the recent phase one permits have added this. So I'll just say right away that we currently are not really proposing or considering requiring that same level of sophisticated asset management that some of the large cities are doing. I mean, that would be great if everyone could do that, but we do recognize that the phase 2 communities cover a wide range of communities, from ones that are almost big enough to be a phase 1 all the way down to some not so large towns and counties and entities. So we're not expecting full-on asset management. However, what we have been working on is reorganizing some of the requirements that are already in the permit, and not necessarily even changing them that much, but there are several different areas where you have to do mapping and what you could call asset inventories of listing out your different storm drain features and prioritizing them. So that's already in the permit. We're just trying to put those all into one sort of unified section of the permit. So kind of every requirement that has to do with mapping something out or inventorying something, it'll all kind of be in one place. And in the future, if more asset management is required, hopefully that'll help set everyone up to do that in the future if it becomes more feasible for everyone. So under pollution prevention and good housekeeping, we're also considering some new integrated pest management requirements. These are in anticipation of some upcoming statewide pesticide amendments or provisions to some of the statewide water quality control plans. So the phase 2 permit already includes some integrated pest management requirements, but we would just be adding a few onto that, I think. For example, maybe more monitoring of the pest populations, and documenting that pesticides are really being used as a last resort. We're working with other units at the Water Board that are working on getting these provisions passed, and these same other Water Board staff have been in contact with other permits that are coming out. And if you want to see an example of what kind of pest management requirements we're thinking about, you might take a look at the Salinas permit, because I know the team that's working on the pesticide provisions gave us some sample language to consider for the permit, and it was similar to integrated pest management requirements that recently got put in the Salinas permit. In the post-construction section, we are hoping to make some major clarifications to the regulated project definition. That's one section that in the existing permit, it just doesn't flow very well, and it's I find it very confusing to figure out exactly what it means. So we've tried to organize that a little better, and are considering some changes to some of the exceptions that are in there. So one example is single-family homes over 5,000 square feet. So the permit has two categories of projects. There are regulated projects, which are ones over 5,000 square feet, and there are small projects, which are ones between 2,500 and 5,000 square feet. And currently, single-family homes are not excluded from the small project category, but they are excluded from the over 5,000 square foot category. And while we were reviewing some of these exceptions, that one didn't make very much sense to us, that the basically smaller homes would have some requirements put on them while these larger homes wouldn't. So that's one thing we're kind of considering putting forward, is actually including single-family homes as regulated projects if they have over 5,000 square feet of impervious surface being affected. We're also looking to clarify the definition of routine road maintenance. I know this question comes up a lot, of what exactly counts and what doesn't. Obviously, pothole repair doesn't trigger putting in a stormwater control measure, but there are a couple of different techniques for improving the pavement that maybe don't necessarily rise to the level of being a regulated project, and so we're looking at what those are. Basically, anytime it's going to actually change the road prism or the kind of hydrography of the road, then that's probably going to trigger it to be a regulated project. But if you're not actually affecting the subbase of the road or really changing the shape of the road at all, then that's probably going to count as routine road maintenance. And we're looking on kind of syncing this up a little better with the definition that's in the Caltrans permit. We're also considering how certain projects are counted that require working on the public right-of-way as a part of approval for that project. So for example, say a new building is trying to go in, but for the city to approve that building, they say you also have to improve the sidewalk and the street in front of the building. Well, we've had a couple examples where the person trying to build this building wants to break that up into multiple projects, so then some of them don't really get counted as needing stormwater controls, or basically the whole area that's being affected isn't going into the amount of volume of water that needs to get treated for the site. And we really want to make it more clear what we want there, and our feeling is that the right-of-way parts of the project should all be included. It should all be counted as one project, so that little bits and pieces of the road and sidewalk work aren't missed. And one point that kind of came up earlier in the last presentation based on someone's question is we kind of look at each of these pieces of roadway or sidewalk as opportunities, because the Phase 2 permit doesn't require, for the most part, doesn't require retrofitting. It basically focuses on improving everything going forward. So anytime that something is being improved and not getting stormwater controls put in for it, basically the Phase 2 permit won't have any effect on it until it's ever worked on again. So just the idea of the sidewalk or road getting improved and piece by piece, and the next thing you know, there's large parts of road that never had stormwater controls put in because they were worked on a little bit at a time. So anyway, that's kind of something that that's what we're thinking about regarding this particular piece here. Another change to the post-construction section we're thinking about is a new allowance for offsite compliance. So that means you'd still have to maximize on-site stormwater measures as much as you could, but then you could have another project in the same watershed to kind of make up for the volume or flow of water that you weren't able to treat on site. You could also chip in with other project proponents on a regional project and all pay in lieu fees to treat your portion of water there. So we have sort of been basing this language and looking at what's in the San Francisco Regional Water Board's municipal regional permit. So that's sort of what we've been basing this piece on. So now I'm going to talk about some of the requirements we've been considering for schools. So I'm going to go again through those 6 minimum control measures I outlined earlier, and I'm going to kind of try to explain what we think each one of those would mean for a school if the school was a permittee. And I'd also like to point out that we're trying to think of ways to possibly reduce these even more for schools who are willing to participate in regional programs. However, the federal regulations do require, if someone's listed as a permittee at all, there are certain minimums that they have to meet, and we're trying to figure out exactly what those are and how much wiggle room we have there, so that we can, incentivize this regional coordination projects as much as possible. And one other point before I dive in that I want to make is that these programs build up over the 5-year permit term. I know some schools have expressed concern about how long they have to implement some of these things, or any permittee really. I mean, when you look at the list of things you have to do, it can be kind of daunting. But most of those things build up. There's a year or two that has a lot of planning steps, and then in year kind of 2 and 3, you're starting to implement a lot more things, and then by year 4 and 5, it's really when your program is kind of fully online and most things are functioning. So I just want to point out that all this stuff doesn't happen immediately, in the first year of the permit or anything like that. So what would illicit discharge detection and elimination look like for schools? We're thinking that the minimum thing schools would have to do would be develop a map of stormwater discharge locations from their campuses. So whether that means it's leaving the campus and going into a water body, a local river or lake, or whether it's exiting your campus or other school district building and going into another MS4, so a local city or county system. For either case, you need to map out and know where your stormwater is leaving your property and where it's going. Then you'd have to use the school district's authority, as much as you could, to pass some kind of rule or whatever other kind of authority the school district can use to just say that anything going into the storm drain that's not stormwater is prohibited. So you may already have a rule like that. And then you would need a kind of procedure of how you will address any of these illicit discharges or spills. Basically, anytime anything's getting into your storm drain that's not stormwater, what will you do? And these don't necessarily have to be as complex as what might be required by a city or county, but you will want to, know who you're going to call if you need to notify someone downstream that there's been a spill or something getting into their storm drain that's not supposed to be there. And then you will need some basic public education to kind of tell the public that what goes in the storm drain does go into local water bodies. And that could be as simple as stenciling some of the storm drains. But that is pretty specifically called out in the federal regulations. Then for the pollution prevention and good housekeeping section, we're thinking for schools that would mean you have to do a review of campus operation and maintenance practices and identify any of those that could be exposing things to stormwater or adding more pollutants into the stormwater. One example that's come up is outdoor lunch areas, and when those are hosed off, sometimes it might go directly into the storm drain. So that's something that you might have to review and come up with an alternative way to clean up the lunch areas. And then you'll also have to assess other on-campus stormwater pollution generating areas. So that could mean if there's any outdoor vehicle maintenance areas, things like wood shops or agricultural areas that might either store things outside or might just have waste that, comes out of the building while you're working on things. And basically you just don't want to expose any of that stuff to stormwater, and you kind of want to keep everything stored properly and orderly. And I also want to point out there's a question on the last, there's a question this morning regarding the industrial general permit and whether this would kind of overlap with that, or whether it would mean that schools could get out of that permit. And the answer is no, not really. We try not to overlap them. So if there's things on campus that already have an industrial, that are already registered in the industrial general permit, then there's going to be language in the permit saying that this particular part I'm talking about right now doesn't really apply to those, or they're basically already covered. But the industrial general permit is a little more specific about what those areas have to do. And so this permit won't get you out of that one. So you can be in both permits. And then one other thing that sort of goes hand in hand with the last two things I mentioned is trash provisions, which existing permittees are already working on, but basically you have to either install trash capture devices or you have to put practices in place to stop any trash from getting into your storm system. And Jaime Favila is going to talk about that a little later. He has a whole couple of slides on, several slides on the trash provisions. So the construction site stormwater runoff control program for schools would be pretty simple. It would just defer to the construction general permit for stormwater, which schools should already be following. This really wouldn't be a new requirement, but that's how that minimum control measure would be covered. And then for post-construction stormwater management, new buildings and outdoor remodeled areas or reconstructed areas would have to put in some low impact development features. And this says per local municipality ordinances, but really I think what we mean is in would be similar to local municipality ordinances. basically, if the school is going the route of doing all these and not doing some of the incentives that I'm about to talk about, then they would probably have to meet stormwater post-construction requirements similar to other existing permittees. And so they'd be kind of in line with the ordinances most local municipalities have. For public education and outreach, that's another area that I know schools have expressed a lot of concern about. They are, the schools don't want the water board coming in and telling them what they have to do with their classroom time or their curriculum. And we have heard the schools loud and clear. And so basically this section would have some messages that, would need to get conveyed by the schools to the public, which public would include, basically anybody that's coming into your jurisdiction. I mean, visitors, staff, or students. These are kind of like general messages that you need to get out. But, there are probably going to be several options of how you can do that. It doesn't necessarily have to be classroom time. It doesn't, there's other ways you can do it through posters and handouts or after school extra credit type of things. Ideally, and this is another part where it would really kind of probably be the most effective to coordinate with the local municipality on this, since they are also trying to get out a lot of these same messages. And this does seem like an area where there could be some coordination. Then for public involvement and participation for the schools, that would mostly just mean making sure they're transparent in the process of getting this whole program going. So anytime there's like something like a school board meeting or something where they're deciding on any of this stormwater program items, you have to make sure that's all properly public noticed, and just that there's information about the program, like posted on the school website. That's a way that this item is often met. Then all permittees have annual reporting requirements, so they have to document what they do each year and then report it to us through our online reporting system.
Paul, this is Diana, our facilitator. Can I kind of gently interrupt to include something?
Oh, yes, please.
All right, good. And so, and this is just for all the audience to understand. As Paul goes through this, what we're thinking for schools, and he's just about ready to click the slide to start sharing with you some options that we've been considering. We want to make sure it's clear that we're still not sure whether or not we're going to propose requirements for schools yet. This is still a very open issue that we look to continue discussing with school representatives, with representatives of small municipalities, with other interested parties. We know it's a very sensitive subject. It was a very sensitive subject to pull schools in back when the existing permit was being developed in 2012 and then adopted in 2013, excuse me, with our state water board having made the decision that at that time they were not going to require schools to enroll. So now we're years later looking at proposed reissuance. And I just want to make sure I clarify that everything Paul is going through is what we are looking at. What would we have to require if we do enroll schools and community colleges, and just what are the factors we're considering. And we're trying really hard to be creative on what options we would want to look at as we do ask our board to possibly consider enrolling schools. All right, thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Diana. Yeah, I guess I'll also say that, Kyle was pointing out in a much earlier slide that we've been doing some outreach to schools since 2018. So we've really been trying to spend the time to explain to the schools what we're going for and trying to get everyone on board. And I know we were getting a lot better or a lot more positive feedback from schools than we had in some of the previous times trying to bring schools into the permit. And but I know there's also been, we're aware obviously that there's been like tons of changes going on the last couple of months due to the pandemic and all kinds of things like that. So, you know, we're taking all that into account, and, you know, we're constantly trying to take the sort of, you know, temperature of the schools, as it were, and sort of continually see what everyone is kind of thinking about this. So next, I'm going to talk about some of the different options we're considering to give incentives to schools to work with their other MS4s that they're near on regional projects. So the first option, which states no stormwater capture on school land, that's basically if the school is just going to work by themselves, they don't plan on working with the local municipality, they would have to go through and do the requirements that I just explained. That's kind of like the basic things you would have to do, and there may be fees. Now, option number 2 here states school-only stormwater capture of the 85th percentile 24-hour storm. So that is still the school working on their own, but if the school was interested in retrofitting their property to do some of this stormwater capture of these specific size of storms, then we might be able to reduce the control measures somewhat and also reduce permit fees. Then the third and fourth options have to do with the school signing a local agreement and working with the local municipalities or regional stormwater projects, and basically allowing the local city to maybe have some of their stormwater come onto school ground, and the school would capture some of that. So that would help these cities meet some of their stormwater capture goals that they have as part of their stormwater plans. And this is really kind of like one of the biggest things we want to incentivize. And so we're really trying to think of ways to reduce what the schools will have to do if they if they get in one of these regional plans, and definitely reduce the permit fees as much as possible for these two options. So the other thing we're considering with schools is how to bring them all in. As I stated before, a lot of the schools have expressed concern in the timing and how long they'll have to implement some of these things. So one thing we're thinking about is possibly phasing in school compliance dates based on the size of schools. So that's kind of assuming that larger schools have more resources and might be able to implement things a little bit sooner, and that smaller schools could maybe get some lessons learned from the larger schools as they start to implement things, and also just have more time to kind of ramp up and get ready to start meeting the permit requirements. So on the right side of this table, you can sort of see those phase-in dates that I'm describing. We're also considering maybe sooner phase-in dates for some of the Southern California areas where there are more of these regional programs going on that might be easier for the schools to more quickly take part in. Then the left side of the table is looking at some of the basic criteria that we're considering using to just decide which schools to even enroll in the first place. So I also should point out, we're only discussing bringing in schools that are within an existing MS4 boundary. So if your school is way out, not in an urban area, then we're not considering regulating you. It's more, we're trying to fill in gaps or holes in the jurisdiction of some of these existing phase 2 permittees who are trying to meet certain stormwater goals in their cities. So the option number 1 that we're considering is only enrolling schools that have at least one campus with greater than 1,000 students. That would be about 340 school districts across the state, and we would phase those in kind of the way I described and as it shows to the right here. And then option number 2 is enrolling school districts based on their total school district student population, and one number we're considering is 30,000 students as kind of the floor for enrollment. So that would affect approximately 30 school districts around the state. And our thinking is just that these larger school districts will, for one, maybe have more resources to implement the permit, as I kind of described earlier, and two, also possibly have more land area that will either be good for these regional projects, or also could be more affecting stormwater by having a larger area that's, draining every time that it storms. So this is all very kind of under consideration. These are sort of just things that we're thinking about in different directions that we could go. I think we're also open to other ideas possibly, and definitely open to different numbers here. I also want to say, I know in the past some people have disagreed with basing it on the student enrollment population, and saying that we should do it based on the acreage of the school. And that is something that could be considered. We don't have as full of information on the acreages of the schools, and also the population is kind of how cities are considered too. So cities aren't necessarily enrolled based on their acreage. So the student population seemed like a good proxy, and that we had actual data for. So unless anyone else wants to, Diana or anyone wants to add anything else about schools, I am going to hand it off to Jaime Favila to discuss some of the trash provisions and trash capture devices.
Yes, Paul, this is Diana. I do want to just make one clarification on the slide. As you'll see on option number 1 on the right-hand side, as we look at the proposed compliance phase-in, the second bullet specifically identifies the phase-in for campuses that have greater than 1,000 students in San Diego, Los Angeles, and the Santa Ana regions. Those are 3 of our regional water quality control board regions that have full regional permits and regional watershed management planning efforts among their phase 1 permittees in place. And we see that it would probably be the easiest in those areas, in those regional board regions, to pull the schools in. As we think through our options, this is an example as what we're looking at as maybe kind of the lowest hanging fruit. Some of the schools, some of the regions that already have been thinking through how to include the schools. So I just wanted to point that out, hopefully maybe triggering some other creative ideas that you folks as participants may have that you can comment on during our comment period. Thank you.
Next slide. Hello, this is Jaime Favila, and I will be presenting the information on the statewide trash provisions implementation program. I'm going to give us some history and background on the statewide trash provisions, describe the land uses that apply, those that are high in trash generation, and how they apply to the MPDS permits in California for either the traditional or the non-traditional phase 2 permittees. And as Kyle mentioned in an earlier slide, the term MS4 does not solely refer to a municipality, but it has a broader application that includes the Department of Transportation, universities, local sewer districts, hospitals, flood control districts, military bases, prisons, and universities. So that's what's currently in the phase 2 permit. Next slide, please. The statewide trash provisions were adopted by the State Water Board, and prior to the adoption of these provisions, many efforts were already being made to reduce trash from entering state waters. As far back as 1996, thousands of volunteers were participating in the coastal cleanup days They were finding lots of trash, debris, and were ending up on the shoreline and in the coastal waters. And volunteers were not only collecting the trash, but they were also documenting the types of trash that were being discharged to ocean waters. And what they were finding was the main types of trash were cigarette butts, food wrappers, container straws, beverage containers like aluminum cans, and plastic bottles, bottle caps, plastic and paper bags. But the number one trash particle that kept reappearing was that trash debris that had a 5 millimeter diameter, and that was the cigarette and cigarette butt. And other efforts were being made in California as well, and they were essentially in two regions of the state. The Los Angeles Regional Water Board that had adopted total maximum daily loads for trash in the affected watersheds of the Los Angeles and the Ventura counties that go back as far back as 2001. And the other being the San Francisco Bay Regional Board. It had considered adoption of TMDLs for trash, but instead crafted trash requirements for their 2009 municipal regional permit. And that permit covers about 70 counties and cities in that region. So it's known that 80% of all trash is leading to the ocean was coming from land-based sources. And one of the largest sources is the storm drain conveyance systems. And trash was not only harming the aquatic life, but it had adverse impacts on beneficial uses of water in California, such as aquatic habitat, drinking water, industrial use, and even recreation. And so with the huge adverse impacts to water quality that continue to grow every year, the State Water Resources Control Board adopted the trash provisions on April 2015 for the regulated MPDS, Municipal Separate Storm Sewer Systems, otherwise known as MS4s. And these were to implement a statewide trash prohibition, make it applicable to all inland surface waters and ocean, and take the place of future trash TMDLs. So as to provide regulatory consistency among the 9 regional water boards, and also provide compliance options for stormwater dischargers. Next slide, please. So these trash provisions that were adopted were placed into the Water Quality Control Plan for oceans, for ocean waters, also known as the Ocean Plan. And the Ocean Plan has 2 sections within the Ocean Plan that is described as Appendix D and Appendix E. And one applies to ocean waters, the other one applies to inland surface waters, enclosed bays and estuaries. And essentially they have a water quality objective that's the same. The trash should not be present in ocean waters along the shorelines, adjacent to areas and amounts that adversely affect the beneficial user or cause a nuisance. So essentially the discharge of trash or the deposition of trash in the surface waters of the state is prohibited. Next slide, please. So the Ocean Plan, there's no enforcement through the Ocean Plan. It's done through the MPDS permits, the stormwater permits. And there's also a prohibition of discharge for other MPDS permits, such as the industrial and construction general permits. The exception or exemption comes into play where we have trash total maximum daily loads, TMDLs, that are in effect. And we know that the Los Angeles Regional Water Board has about 15 or 16 trash TMDLs at the current time. And in those watersheds where there is a TMDL, these trash provisions do not apply, but they do apply in the Los Angeles areas where there is not a TMDL. Waivers are granted to small municipal permittees, and they go through the process of being approved at the regional board level. That's where they begin anyhow. Next slide, please. So at the time when the trash amendments and provisions were adopted, the existing NPDES permits were not ready for reissuance. And so what the water boards did was they issued water board or water quality informational orders. And these orders explicitly gave instructions on how to proceed with planning for the trash compliance that was going to be required. And the first thing they had to do was to do an assessment of their jurisdiction, develop a preliminary jurisdictional map that included all their high priority land uses. It had to, for those that selected track 1, they had to identify those storm drains and show where they're going to be installing the full capture systems. For the track 2, they had to do a trash assessment, and there was a recommended on-land visual trash assessment method. They could follow that or come up with a suitable one, if not the OVTA. And they had to show where their priority land uses showed higher trash generating areas. They had to also propose where they're going to be installing trash control measures. They had the option of putting a full capture system, a combination of multi-benefit measures, institutional controls like street sweeping, and public education. So this all had to be, for the track 2s, included in an implementation plan that had to be approved by the regional boards. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the track 1s were where they're installing full capture devices for capture systems that were for storm drains that were capturing the runoff. All their storm drains had to have these full capture systems installed. For the track 2 installation of the combination controls, they had to ensure, they had to provide a rationale in their implementation plan that showed that these combination of controls would be equivalent to full capture systems installed. Next slide, please. And where these errors had to be recorded on their jurisdictional maps, it had to be in high priority land use areas. These were the high density residential areas with 10 or more dwelling units per acre, the industrial land uses, commercial land uses, and mixed urban land uses that was a combination of the 3 above. And then last, the public transportation systems. Next slide. When the trash provisions were adopted by the State Water Board, there were already a list of certified trash devices that had been certified at the regional board. These were grandfathered in. We created a certified full capture list of trash treatment control devices, which separated in 2 parts. Table 1 shows the catch basin inserts and other devices. And those primarily list the manufacturer, the owner of the trash device, what the name of the trash device is, when they applied. So there is a difference in this column that shows whether it's an application or a fact sheet. The application that was certified was done by the State Water Board. We've done 22 certifications since the implementation of the trash program here at the State Water Board. And the others were grandfathered in. They're listed as fact sheets. And we've had problems with these, some of the grandfathered devices. We learned through the Mosquito Vector Control Association of California that these were becoming a harborage for mosquito breeding. They were presenting a problem. Their local vector control districts were applying treatment to a lot of these storm drains, and where they were finding some of these storm or catch basin inserts or high flow generating devices, they were finding that water was in them, a great breeding site for mosquitoes. And so it presents a health hazard, and we had to make this a new requirement that wasn't a requirement of these certified devices that were done at the regional board level. Next slide. Table 2 represents all the devices in the high flow capacity. And we've got a lot of new applications. These are certified by the State Water Board. My coworker Leo and I review the applications and then submit them forward for management approval. Our deputy director is the designee for the executive director and certifies the documents when they're in full compliance with the requirements. Next slide, please. Well, that was the end of my slide presentation. And I do want to recognize the efforts by many of you who have made progress on reducing the trash in your jurisdictions. I know it's a major problem throughout our state, as well as throughout our country, but California is doing something about it now. And we want to thank you for your efforts. They're insurmountable. The problem can be solved and is doable with the collaborative efforts from everyone, the public, the agencies, the organizations, and ultimately the municipal stormwater committees implementing a trash program that complies with and achieves the water quality objective for trash and the prohibition that has a deadline of December 2030. So with that, I want to thank you and turn it back to Diana.
Great. Thank you, Jaime. This is Diana. And thank you very much for that last note. That is a very important acknowledgement on all the work that has been taken statewide. And Jaime and Leo Cosentini, Jaime Favilla and Leo Cosentini, they're actually working with everyone hands-on. And so they're the perfect eyes to observe on how much work is actually being done statewide. All right, so a time check. It is 2:13. And so we are 2 minutes ahead of our scheduled 15-minute break, which is at 2:15. But we're gonna go ahead now and start transitioning into break. We will reconvene at 2:30. During this break time, this is a perfect time if you have any questions, you didn't understand what was being presented, you didn't like what was being presented, you have a comment and so forth. Please follow the directions on this screen. Again, send your question or comments to this email address. We will have this slide up during break. We will also have a similar slide up while we're answering questions and receiving comments for you to continue providing your input. So with that, I am gonna go ahead and start our 15-minute break, and we will see and hear from you all at 2:30. Thank you. Hi, this is Diana Messina, the workshop facilitator. We're doing a time check. It is 2:30, and so we are now reconvening this workshop for our next questions and answers and comments period. This workshop ends at 4 o'clock this afternoon. And so we are here up through about 10 minutes before 4 to be available to answer all your questions and receive your comments. Next slide, please. Great, thank you. So, excuse me, Kyle McNeil of our staff will be moderating the questions and the comments. He's been looking through them. He'll be reading them out. We will be using all of our time to get to as many questions and comments as possible. And as we approach the end of this time period, we will definitely let you know if there are questions and comments that we were not able to get to and how we will be addressing those. All right, so with that, Kyle, take it away.
Hi, thank you, Diana. Yeah, so this is Kyle McNeil. Like Diana said, I will be the announcer of questions, and then I'll pass them over to our lead on this permit, Paul Levy, or another staff with the appropriate expertise to answer your question or address your comment. So a couple things to note is while I'm announcing your questions, I may be paraphrasing, so or I may also be announcing a question that is a combination of two similar questions. So it may not be exactly as you've worded it, but I will state your name and your affiliation so that you do know that your question is being addressed. Another note to make is if you end up submitting 10 questions or just a lot of questions, we will likely not answer all 10 of your questions because we would like to hear from as many people as possible to get a good feedback from a variety of people and backgrounds. Okay, so let's look at our first question. Which is from, I might pronounce it wrong, but Heidi M. Nijmeyer, who is the NPDS program manager from the city of Salinas. So she has kind of a long comment question. She states that the city of Salinas is having a difficult time ensuring that schools submit stormwater pollution prevention plans and develop stormwater control plans that incorporate their post-construction requirements. They've had difficulty working with the division of the state architect who reviews those plans to get those incorporated into school projects that fall within their boundary. As it is now, only those projects that are under the construction general permit are technically required to implement the post-construction requirements. However, this does not always happen. Because the requirement to comply with post-construction requirements is a requirement of the construction general permit, they do not technically have the authority to force school projects to implement low-impact development to meet the post-construction requirements. That authority belongs to the regional board. Diana, can you, or Paul or Diana, can you say more about this comment / question?
Yes, this is Diana, and I will start it, and then Paul, you can add as necessary. Thank you. Thank you very much for submitting this question and the concern. And so basically with this comments, we have a city that is trying to work with a school, but is running up against some conflicting requirements when it comes to the school's decisions and the requirements in our existing statewide stormwater permit for stormwater discharges from construction activities. Basically, our MS4 permits regulate stormwater discharges from existing urban environments. And so if we were to have schools enroll in this permit or somehow, some way place the requirements on them for stormwater management and post-construction, then that would carve out a solution for cities or municipalities that are trying to work with the schools, but they don't have the authorities. When you mentioned that the regional board has the authority, yes, a regional board has the authority. The state board also has the authority if schools are included in a regulatory permit or any other regulatory vehicle that they can place on the schools. This is an example of why we would want to pull in schools into this permit or have schools partnership with phase 1 permittees. We would have to think through all the details, and you posed a very realistic scenario on how we can have that consistent implementation after construction and into post-construction, the post-construction environment, and make sure we have that full transition for consistent post-construction features that work well with the surrounding municipality. Paul, did you want to add to that?
Yes, I've been reading, kind of trying to read more carefully through this long comment, and I think what they're getting at is that the schools are complying with the construction general permit, and the construction permit says you either have to implement certain post-construction requirements that are in the construction permit, or if you're under another permit or in the jurisdictional area of another permit, then you have to implement those. However, so I think this permit is trying to imply that the schools are within their area and should do their construction requirements, but technically I think they're not. So they would really only be held to the post-construction standards that are in the construction permit. But yeah, basically the permit, we would be trying to get them to sort of come more in line with each other through their reissuance.
Correct. And once, if a school is regulated or is in partnership with a municipality, then that is how we would be able to have that continuum from what is required in the construction general permit going forward after construction.
Oh, this reminds me, there's one other thing I meant to point out during the presentation and I kind of forgot. But the Central Coast Regional Water Board, they have a set of regional post-construction requirements. So the existing Phase 2 permit has a provision which allows a regional board to come up with their own set of post-construction requirements. And then basically all the Phase 2 entities kind of get to skip that part of the statewide permit and just look at the regional requirements. And we've got a couple questions kind of asking whether this is going to overwrite those or whether those are going to have to change. And we're planning on keeping that provision, allowing those region-specific requirements to stay. And I don't think us updating the permit necessarily means that those will have to change. So the Central Coast will still have their own post-construction requirements. And if those are going to change, it would probably be whenever that reissuance time comes up.
Okay, so next question is from Autumn Malanka from Santa Barbara. And Autumn asks, if a school within a district wishes to adopt or join an existing MS4 program, and it falls into the boundary of an existing city's MS4 program, but would prefer to join the county program instead, would that be possible? Our schools allow that choice to adopt into a nearby / local program?
This is Diana. Thank you for that question. That's an interesting question. I was looking at that question during break. Our ultimate goal here is to have partnerships between municipalities and the schools within the municipal jurisdiction. If in this municipal specific case, there is a regional project or a partnership that makes sense for the school to combine its efforts with the county, then we would want to make sure we write a permit that does not disallow that kind of partnership. I'm sure you have a very unique situation with behind this question. And so we would want to explore this further and see what would be the water quality benefits and the stormwater management benefits with this school partnering with the county instead of the city.
Okay. Our next question is from Reed Bogert from the San Mateo Countywide Stormwater Program. And his question is asking if will schools have requirements or incentives to implement low impact development on campuses for existing buildings or impervious conditions? And if so, what would be the timeline for these requirements or incentives?
So that is one of the options that we mentioned in a previous slide, that whether the school was working with the local, regional, or local cities or not, if they were interested in retrofitting their campuses, then that could lead to either reduced permit fees and possibly reduced permit requirements. So that is something we are thinking about a little bit. I'm not sure about the timeline and how that would work.
Yes, and this is Diana. About the timeline, I guess the timeline that we look at for a permit would be the timeline in which a school would be enrolled or regulated somehow, some way through this permits. We don't necessarily look at the timeline of when there would be specific retrofit projects. So, so when a retrofit project is to take place, then the requirements of the permit for the retrofit projects would apply. So we will, so we wouldn't necessarily look at it so project specific. What we do want to have further discussions on, however, is the timeline in which we would be looking that the proposed permit requirements would become effective for schools or for any other new permittees that may end up in the newly adopted permit.
Okay, next we have a comment from Kim Porter representing the city of Paso Robles. And so this is just a general comment with regards to the number of students determination. Please be consistent when addressing school populations versus district populations. So Paul, can you clarify when we're talking about numbers, is that school or district?
Yes, I can clarify. We sort of are considering looking at it both ways as a criteria for bringing the schools in. One way is to look at the total of the whole district, and then the other way, we were thinking maybe basing it on only bringing in districts that had at least had a school of a certain size. So they were purposely kind of inconsistent in that slide.
Great, thank you. So our next question is from Anne Gillespie, representing San Luis Obispo County's stormwater program. So the first a comment by Anne is requesting a clause in the new permit that pauses MS4 program audit proceedings while state and/or local emergency declarations are in effect in an MS4 area. While program compliance is important, the state should enable municipal program staff to focus on resources on disaster service work rather than staff resources being focused on ongoing or newly commenced MS4 program auditing.
Mhm. This is Diana. And thank you for that comment, Anne. As the COVID pandemic came upon us, one of the primary tasks that the state and the regional water boards had before them was how to address the difficulties that municipalities and other dischargers are going through when it comes to compliance with regulatory permits. As our boards do acknowledge that compliance with regulatory permits is essential, our protection of water quality is essential. We currently have in place a process for temporary regulatory relief based on any COVID-related restrictions that does not allow a permittee to comply with all their requirements. With that said, our board and our executive management of the state water board, and similarly at the regional water quality control boards, we know that the impact on this COVID pandemic very well is not just short term, but long term also, as there's the economic impact of residences and businesses and industries not being able to pay their utility bills. And so we are being very sensitive to that, as well as trying to balance out the need to continue protecting water quality. And with that, there's different factors. There's the immediate impact of COVID, there's the somewhat short to long-term impact, and then there is the long-term impacts. And we're trying to kind of identify what those impacts are. This is why, as staff, during these workshops, we are emphasizing that this is an open issue. We have put in a lot of thought into the information that Paul presented on different options for schools and minimum control measures. But there is still a lot of discussion that must be had when it comes to the diminishing resources that small municipalities and schools, as well as non-traditionals, do have during this pandemic. So I don't know if I answered your question or your comment with another question comment, but just the overall answer is yes. That is very bright on our radar.
Thank you, Diana. So moving on to a question from Delynn Elson-Lloyd at the representing the Municipal Consulting Group with clients in the Northern Region and Central Valley Region. Do you anticipate removing the requirement for the incorporation of water quality and habitat enhancement features in new flood management facilities listed in the pollution prevention and good housekeeping section due to the potential overlap with federal mandated flood control management permits such as the 404 and/or the 1600 permit issued by the Army Corps?
Yeah, that section, I know some people had kind of commented that maybe that should be removed. I don't think we've found a reason not to remove it. It does seem like it was kind of put in there because, I mean, looking back through some of the federal regulations, they do have some, guidance in there on what kind of things to include, and they do mention something similar to that section. So I'm guessing that's why it was included in the first place. But most people that I've talked to seem like that section has not really been especially useful to them. So yes, we're still considering removing that.
And this is Diana. Overall, our state and regional water boards have been examining the overlap between stormwater permits and our own water board 401 certification requirements, trying to make that line of where one certification or the Army Corps requirements and where the stormwater permit requirements begin. So your question had some very good detail, and I just wanted to include that we're looking at even that bigger picture to make sure that we're not either double regulating with the Army Corps requirements and the 401 cert requirements versus a stormwater permit, or that we're not placing that project proponent under two conflicting permits or conflicting requirements from the federal government and the water boards. Somehow, some way, if it would help to address a concern, we could include a clause on during a certain scenario which requirements would supersede, if that would be helpful.
Okay. Our next question comes from Jackie McLeod, representing the city of Watsonville in their Public Works Department. And this one's on operation and maintenance. For long-term operations and maintenance, if it's a regional project, who would be responsible for maintaining the new stormwater project if it's a regional project? For example, a developer has to meet tier 3 or 4 requirements. The city has a potential project in the watershed that would align with the development and implementation of the post-construction requirements. The developer would pay the capital cost and design for the project, but typically for private projects, the developer then signs an operations and maintenance agreement. How would that look for a regional project?
That's a good question. First off, I'll say that this commenter mentions tier 3 and 4 requirements, which I think are specific to the Central Coast region-specific post-construction requirements. So if anyone else is on the line that's not in the Central Coast region, don't worry, those are terms maybe not necessarily applicable to you. But I think the question is still applicable to everyone in that if project proponents are contributing to a regional project, then who's going to take care of it later? I'm not sure exactly how that works. I'll have to look into that more.
Yes, and this is Diana. Ultimately, the permittee identified on the corresponding permit is responsible, regardless if there is a private entity that is a contractor or that has gone forward and conducted the work and hands over the project to the municipality. Therefore, similar on if there is a private developer that builds a development, or there are private parties that builds a regional project, the permittee that actually owns the project, or in which the project is the compliance avenue for a permit, is the one that has the regulatory relationship with the corresponding water board. And so with that, it's the permittee that holds responsibility to comply with the requirements in the permit. I know many times this is confusing, and what we like to state is that there is attention that is placed into contracts that are executed between a local municipality and a private developer or a private contractor or any private party to make sure that they do deliver on that project, because ultimately for the water boards, it's the permittee that is responsible for compliance. Also, well, I'm not sure if we're done with that. I have some follow-up on a previous question. Once we're done with this question, I'd like to go back to that, but I don't want to cut this question short. Paul, do you have anything more you'd like to add?
No, I don't think so.
All right. Kyle, if I may, we have a regional board staff person that just emailed us behind the scene as a follow-up for Ann Gillespie's question. And so the email reads, Ann may be concerned due to the recent requests that have been made for information. There are agencies out there that currently are being audited by the regional boards, and that the concern may have been asking if the state and regional water boards are considering putting a pause on our auditing due to the pandemic. Our statewide permits are implemented and enforced through our regional water quality control boards. Our regional water quality control boards, they set their priorities on what should go forward and what should not go forward during these times. So that is at the regional board's discretion. So we do have some regional boards that have taken the discretion to proceed with the audits. Some of them are delaying their audits somewhat or adding, additional time for the permittees to address the audit findings. So we just want to make sure that we add to your question on that. It's truly a regional water board's discretion on prioritizing the work during the pandemic. And so if audits are going forward, that's because the regional board has prioritized that audit. I definitely recommend that all permittees work closely with their regional boards on any issues you may be having when it comes to challenges complying with your permits. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Diana. So our next question is from Maggie Matthias, representing Second Nature. And it's about electronic reporting. So how will the permit help cities make the most of the opportunity to improve reporting efficiency that comes with upcoming requirements for electronic reporting? And I actually would like to answer this question because I've been working a bit on this. So the upcoming requirements for electronic reporting, that they were originally scheduled to be implemented by the end of this year, but they have since been lengthened to be implemented in December of 2023. So we have another 3 years with that. And so our permit will definitely make use of including enhanced reporting efficiency, and we're still in the works of how to do that best. What we're trying to do is enhance our online portal for the application. And so when you apply as a permittee, you input your information, and then from then on, whenever you're submitting annual reports, that any information that was previously inputted can then be auto-populated into future annual reports, and the permittees will have a much easier time reporting each year henceforth.
Yes, and Kyle, if I may add to that, one of our state water board's initiatives, which especially our board chair takes extremely seriously, is enhancing our data quality throughout the entire state. And when I say our, it doesn't mean just the water board's data, it means all data collected throughout the state. There has been a very large effort led by our Office of Information Management and Assessment within the State Water Board to work with our existing statewide databases and to have our permits, not only from this program, but various permitting programs, as well as stormwater, surface water ambient monitoring data and groundwater data, to have it come in a consistent format and quality to where we as the water boards are actually providing that data to the public for the public to use. So as we put together as we continue to update electronic reporting requirements, we always have in mind of that larger objective to make sure it's not only efficient for the discharger, but that also that data holds a lot of value when it comes to using it and making sure that it is available, it is deemed good quality, and in the format in which it can be publicly used. We continue working with our statewide databases. We're always concerned about the cost of our monitoring and reporting requirements, and any way we can use technology and we can think through the requirements we're placing on the permittees on not only how much it costs, but how much value that data brings forth to us and the public in general. That is something that we always have to think through. We know it's important that as we our state of the arts increases when it comes to technologies, that we actually progress forward and not backward when it comes to efficiency. We definitely welcome any comments and further discussions on how we can do that with our electronic reporting requirements.
Thank you, Diana. Yes, absolutely. Okay, and then kind of a similar question from Maggie Mathias from Second Nature. How will the permit incentivize a shift towards more performance-based assessments of stormwater program effectiveness for cities? And how can this evolution make satisfaction of permit requirements for cities more efficient and cost-effective?
Paul here. That's kind of a tricky one. I mean, ideally everything in the permit would be more performance-based and you could point to clear things showing improvement. And that's what the program effectiveness and implementation, now I'm forgetting everything the acronym stands for, but there's a thing in the permit now, the PEAIP, that each municipality and permittee is supposed to assess their effectiveness. But yeah, it's hard to measure, and so I'm not really sure what shifts we have coming up to kind of improve that.
I can add to that. This is Diana. I'm going to go back to some of our very basics. The first is the very first slide of the staff presentation on what does NPDES stand for, which is the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. Ultimately, our performance measures for any surface water protection programs, such as the NPDES programs, is the reduction of loading of pollutants or the reduction of discharge of pollutants into our surface waters. However, with that said, there is a very important second component in which our state and regional water boards have embarked on in the recent years, and that is stormwater capture. It is placing stormwater to multiple beneficial uses and also to protect our drinking water sources. So performance measures, it's easy to look at a regulatory permit and state that, well, compliance with the permit is performance. What we look at when it comes to performance really is how much stormwater has been captured and put to beneficial uses or added to our drinking water supply. Not only compliance with discharge requirements, but actually how much reduction in pollutant loading do we see to our surface waters. And with that also is what is the impact on better protecting our drinking water sources through our stormwater management. So, so when it comes to performance measures, there's the immediate ones with permit compliance, and then there's the more global ones and what we're really after to achieve. Thank you.
Okay, our next question is from Matt Vander Linden, representing the city of Solvang. And he asks, can you make it easier, simpler and easier for small agencies like Solvang and to be co-permittees with larger agencies such as Santa Barbara County?
I think we would be interested in making that simpler and easier. I guess I would just say that we're open to suggestions. So if Solvang has an example of ways that would be made simpler and easier, or if there's another permit that they know of that does that. Well, I guess I also want to know in what ways do they want to be co-permitted? Like, do they just mean the reporting will be together, or will they be working together on all the different parts of the permit? I would love to hear more about what exactly they mean by that.
And yes, this is Diana. Exactly what Paul said, and to build on that, there are a lot of small communities that would be under the phase 2 permit in the Los Angeles region, in which the phase 1 permittees have pulled them into the watershed management planning efforts. And that was working very closely with the regional boards. We know there's some small phase 2 permittees in the Central Valley that have looked at that in combining with a phase 1 and have chosen not to. I think it really is kind of specific to if the regional board will allow that, and also the arrangements between the 2 permittees, definitely in pulling the small community into the phase 1. We do want to write this permit in a way that still allows that, as long as as long as that partnership fulfills the same water quality protection from one full phase 1 permittee as it would if it was otherwise 2 separate permittees. we definitely would want to include that also if it adds efficiencies for one or both of the agencies involved.
Our next question is from Christina Claxton, representing the city of San Luis Obispo. And her question is asking for an example on, so in our presentation, we mentioned that there would be an expansion of industrial and commercial inspections for facilities and incorporating new elements, but not to the extent of phase 1. Can you provide an example?
I'm not sure if I can think of a very good example right off the top of my head, but basically some of the regional boards were really interested in adding this requirement, and really thought that there were other kind of local inspection programs going on, which I can't remember the name of right now, but other kind of inspections like health and safety kind of things that are also have to go to different industrial and commercial facilities, and that there sort of might be some way to integrate a stormwater component into that. Basically, as you're walking on site, do you see anything that looks like dry weather flows in the storm drains? Do you see anything outside that's stored improperly that maybe might not be a health and safety thing, but could be negative stormwater impact?
This is Diana. Kyle, I would like to just add something. It might not be directly related. It has, though, been sparked with this whole COVID pandemic. Our inspectors at the State and Regional Water Board have been looking into virtual inspections. They're not always, they don't always have, the applicability in which we need for all inspections. However, we are looking to how we can do more inspections in an efficient manner so that we can focus our staff resources on going out in person to the sites that we deem are more important, that we go out and see what's going on in person. So I just wanted to add that, we are looking at how to be more efficient when it comes to inspection. Excuse me. We also, though, however, know that there needs to be more eyes and more documentation on what is actually going on out with the industrial facilities.
Yes. So moving on to the topic of trash, we have a question from Ann Gillespie, representing the municipality in Central California, San Luis Obispo, and asks, when does the state anticipate that regional boards will comment on or approve Track 2 trash implementation plans? We are not aware of permittees having received comments or approval to date.
This is Jaime. With the question about trash implementation plan approvals, the water quality order, the information order that was issued back in 2017, it said that the implementation plans were not necessarily required to be approved, but they had to be subject for approval. And I don't know of any regional boards that have approved any. I don't have that information. I know that the implementation plan does have to be subject to approval. And the other thing about the Track 2 implementation plan is that if they're going to request for an alternative land use, in a jurisdictional map, it has to be submitted in the plan for review, and that is to be subject for approval by the executive officer.
Okay, so we have another trash question from Jeff Condit, representing Monterey Regional Stormwater Management Program. Regarding the trash provisions, can you please elaborate on the waivers granted for small municipal permittees through the regional boards? Is there a process for receiving a waiver, and where is information regarding this process? Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was expecting Paul to respond to that one because there are requirements in the current phase 2 MS4 permit. And I don't know the exact process, but Paul, more familiar with the phase 2 permit, maybe he can respond to that.
Yeah, sorry, I was a little confused if this question was about waivers from the permit in general or just waivers from the trash provisions. So we're planning on, I think, keeping the same waiver options that allow you to be waived from the entire permit, but I'm not aware of any waiver options that have been discussed specifically for the trash provisions.
No.
Okay, and then another question about trash from Michael Trapani from the County of Monterey. His question is, will there be language in the updated permit that addresses trash assessment data? Specifically, how may any assessments of green, which no or low trash for a given area required for that area to be removed from the priority land use area and therefore not required to have any trash removal implementation strategy?
So again, this is a track 2 question. Track 2's in their implementation plan have to do an assessment of their priority land uses. And if they are thinking of doing an alternative area for implementing trash controls, that has to be listed also in the trash implementation plan and is subject to approval. And what was the end of that question? What was the latter part of that question, Kyle?
So if the area is green with no and low trash, what would be required for them to have, for them not to be required to have any trash removal implementation strategy?
Oh, okay. So if they've identified a priority land use area that is low in trash generation, they should focus on those high trash generating areas, and those should all be documented in their implementation plan. And if it's outside of a priority land use area, again, they need to describe that in their plan, and that's reviewed by the regional board, and they again are subject to approving that alternative land use.
Okay, thank you, Jaime. So now we have a couple questions about post-construction requirements. So our first one is from John Taravskis, representing WGR Southwest Incorporated, and it's on drainage management areas. So his comments / question is, sometimes it is difficult to capture and treat all drain management areas, such as driveways that are sloping off-site. Would it be possible to reword the permit to require that the stormwater design volume or the stormwater design flow be met for the aggregate site and not each drainage management area? In other words, small de minimis drainage management areas would not need to be treated as long as the site as a whole is treating the aggregate volume or flow treatment goals.
I think that I see what he's saying about there being possible de minimis drainage areas, although I guess we would have to define exactly what we mean by de minimis. But I think besides having de minimis ones, if you have multiple drainage areas and you want to kind of treat them all in one, this sort of goes back to, I think, just kind of a guiding philosophy of the permit when it last came out, was trying to have dispersed treatment. So, you know, you can argue whether that's actually better or not, but I think that was sort of just a guiding principle, was trying to have, rather than having like one giant treatment facility, to have more spread out kind of treatment going on throughout the watershed and in these different drainage areas. So yeah, that's something that we can consider.
Yes, and this is Diana. I guess there is another factor also on where are these other flows flowing to. And so for the example of the driveway that slopes oppositely, where are those flows being received? So that's a very good comment, and that can be considered.
Okay, our next post-construction question is from Agnes Martelet, representing the city of Carmel by the Sea. So you touched on this earlier, Paul, but so the Central Coast Regional Board issued its own watershed-based post-construction requirements, which the municipal agencies of the Central Coast must follow. So will these Central Coast Regional Board requirements be will the Central Coast Regional Board be required to reissue their post-construction requirements, or will they automatically be included in the new permit?
So I think they'll automatically be included in the new permit. That's my understanding. And I'm not really sure exactly what the kind of reissuance schedule is on the Central Coast post-construction requirements, or when those kind of come up for review. But yes, I think those are going to automatically kind of continue to just be incorporated into the permit.
Thank you. And then a second question for the same person, Agnes. You mentioned clarifying the definition of routine road maintenance to match the Caltrans permit. Will the Central Coast PCRs also need to match the same definition? I guess we might not know this, since that would be up to the Central Coast.
Yeah, I think this would still basically have the same answer as the previous question, that the Central Coast requirements will continue to be their own. And if they decide that they need to change that definition, then they could do that whenever the review of those requirements comes up. But I don't think this would necessarily trigger them to do that.
Okay. And then a third question on post-construction from Kathleen Garnand, representing Santa Barbara County. She is interested in, so with the post-construction requirements, schools are exempt from local land use permits except under certain circumstances. MS4s don't have a role in permitting. Design standards are determined by the Division of State Architect. How has Water Board staff included the Division of State Architect, and what do you anticipate to change at the state level?
So the Water Board has worked with the state architect in the last few years to issue a kind of high-level guidance document for schools about what kind of stormwater low-impact development options they have. I've had a couple of meetings with the state architect. I'm not sure exactly what kind of state level change there will be. They weren't I guess I wouldn't say they were very receptive to taking on new plan review responsibilities, or basically they didn't seem kind of very aware of those how stormwater permitting worked when I talked to them. So I probably need to have another meeting with them, and this is something we're still kind of figuring out.
Gotcha. Our next question is from Holly Dillon, who is representing ATSNA, I believe, from Monterey, California. And her question is there a website resource with the history of the California stormwater regulation and permitting that was shown in the introductory slides? So I guess just where can one find resources on just California stormwater regulation?
That's a good question, and that's something that I think probably previously there used to be more of that up on our stormwater website, but a lot of things recently got taken down due to new web accessibility requirements, and since it takes kind of a lot of resources to remediate the documents, we've only focused on putting up the most essential ones right now. So I would have to look and see what the best place to redirect you on that is.
This is Diane. I want to provide some clarification on that. So our state and regional water board staff have been working very diligently to I forgot what the word, to remediate existing documents that are on our websites. The documents must comply with new rules in which all our documents must be accessible for a computer to read. So we've been working very hard on that, and the new rule, statewide rule, is that all documents that are not remediated for accessibility will be pulled down. So we've been doing a lot of work on our websites to remediate all the existing statewide permits and all the existing information that's necessary for permittees to understand how to stay in compliance. Unfortunately, a lot of the historic information is being pulled down. But we accept your comments, we hear you, and we have your email address. So if we find any resources for you, we will definitely email you back. Thank you for your comment.
Oh, I also just remembered that there should be some of that information in the fact sheet of the existing permit, which has been remediated and is up on our website.
Awesome. So the last question that we have so far is, there's a comment and a question from Rachel Fatuhi, representing Santa Cruz County. So her comment is, while considering overall changes to the general permit, please keep in mind the expected long-term economic impacts of COVID-19. Once regulation is instituted, municipalities would be required to implement them, and the state and regional water boards would need to enforce the MS4's compliance regardless of the sustained economic impacts.
This is Diana. Yes, not only thank you for your comment, that is a very serious comment. And what the commenter is stating is that once there's requirements set forth in an adopted permit, that permit serves as regulations. And so when there are these long-term challenges continuing to take place, there's that extra effort for having to be temporarily not excused from the requirements, but temporarily given more time to comply with the requirements. And so that is one issue that's we know makes this entire permit and a lot of the different components still ripe for further discussion. This is our effort for our preliminary stakeholder discussions, getting your comments and questions. We do foresee that we will need to have several follow-up focused stakeholder meetings, not only one-on-one with certain categories of stakeholders, but also combined meetings that combine stakeholders and interested parties, such as having a meeting together with municipalities and schools to further understand from you what is feasible, what's the temperature out there. We like to meet on a regular basis with our environmental groups and to understand and make sure that their largest water quality concerns are addressed. Many times we will, for other permitting projects, we have found that what has been effective was actually having representatives from our larger environmental groups in the same room as representatives of the permittees, and so that there can be cross discussion and everyone kind of understands the primary goals of the different interests, and that's very helpful also. So we do recognize, especially when it comes to considering including schools under this regulatory permit, that there needs to be continued consideration and follow-up discussions on if and how, as staff, we do recommend to our board to include schools in this permit.
And then a follow-up question by Rachel Fatuhi. Please expand on the expected overlap and cost in enforcement of inspections of industrial sites. Municipalities do not have additional resources to enforce requirements of industrial general permits while the state collects the annual permit compliance fees.
So I guess I'm actually kind of glad this came back up regarding these enhanced industrial and commercial inspections that we're considering. I got an email from one of my regional board colleagues in between questions. Someone earlier asked about examples of overlapping programs that we had in mind. And so we're thinking of things like fats, oils, and grease inspections, the CUPA, which is CUPA, and that stands for the Certified Unified Program Agency. So that's consolidation of some different hazardous waste programs that counties often have, and also some pre-treatment inspections for wastewater treatment plants. Those are the sort of things we're thinking of that cities are already potentially out there doing that could also incorporate some stormwater elements into them. So I'm not sure if these inspections we're talking about are exactly enforcing the industrial general permit necessarily. I don't think that's really what we mean.
Okay, so that is the extent of the comments and questions that we've received at this point, and I believe we still have 11 more minutes in our question and answer session. So if you have a lingering thought that you'd like answered, please email in quickly. But I'll let our speakers maybe rehash any points that they'd like to expand upon, that they remembered a new point on, or that they feel deserves a little bit more explanation.
Yes, thank you, Kyle. This is Diana Messina. As we go forward with the development of this draft permit reissuance, I want to reiterate that we're trying to keep the big picture in mind. Here in California, we're basically the leaders when it comes to stormwater management for states such as ours. There's been a lot of work and successes that have been embedded in existing regional programs throughout the states. There's been a lot of successes in every single region, whether they have regional programs or still individual permits on assessing costs, assessing efficiencies. And what continues to come forth is where regionalization or partnerships are applicable, that there is a lot of efficiency. So, so as we go forward with this phase 2 permit, this phase 2 permit is basically one of the last permits that is hopping on board with this with this. I'm sorry, it's late in the afternoon. With this approach of trying to make regional projects and partnerships open to those partners and municipalities that choose to go forward with those approaches. It gets difficult to have lots of different options in one permits, but we're getting a lot of feedback on the need for different options on how the different permittees under this permit can go forward with compliance. And so with that, we look to apply an avenue that we have applied in other statewide permits. And that basically is to incentivize partnership and stormwater capture. So as we go forward, we're going to always be keeping that big picture in mind. As we are a drought state, every drop of water, including every drop of stormwater, is precious to us. And we want and we will use our regulatory avenues to make sure we follow the direction that we have started to go in, both the state and regional water boards, as well as the municipalities and other permittees. So I just wanted to kind of include that as an overarching scope of what our goals are for this statewide permit.
Okay, so we received another question just now from Jim Rumbley, from representing the City of Santa Barbara, their Creeks Division. And so he states that in a recent PowerPoint presentation by State Water Board staff regarding the Phase 2 General Permit Update, one of the changes proposed to post-construction requirements involved contribute in lieu fees to regional projects. Would you mind discussing this in greater detail? And I guess as a follow-up to that question is does that phrase contribute in lieu fees to regional project mean that regional boards will collect the in lieu fees and administer the program and therefore manage the projects, or how will the in lieu fees be determined?
I don't think the in lieu fees would be to the regional water boards. I think the regional project would be more something like it could be a project that the city does or the county does, and then people that live in the area that this regional project is covering, if they're not going to put stormwater controls on their own property, then they could pay fees towards this, say, watershed-wide sort of project. So no, I don't. Well, I don't think it's something that the regional board would do. It's something that maybe would be not necessarily the permittee. So it could be something the city does, or it could be something I think that several, projects which are under the city's jurisdiction, those project proponents could, band together and do this kind of regional project approach.
Yes, Paul, this is Diana. You're referring to local cooperative agreements?
I think that's right. I guess I'm saying I think this in lieu fee for a regional project could take a couple different forms, and that, but I am clarifying that the regional project wouldn't be run by the regional boards, which was the second half of their question.
So someone we heard from previously, John Taravskis, representing WGR Southwest, has another question. So this one relates to construction inspections. Starts out with a comment. It would be helpful if the water board could be more prescriptive on what construction inspections are required throughout the year, rather than leaving it as priority/risk-based. He feels it is too nebulous of criteria. This would help bring more consistency from MS4 to MS4 so that contractors and builders know what to expect. In other words, we would like to see a permit requirement that states something like, quoting, monthly during the storm season with follow-up inspections for non-compliant sites with one inspection at the end of the dry season, end quote. Also, yeah, we'll go with that, and then a follow-up question after that.
I guess I'll just say that that's a good comment, and we'll take that into account. We are that's another section that we're thinking about doing some changes to, kind of like what you're talking about, but we haven't fully gotten to that yet. We're still kind of spending a lot of time on the post-construction part right now.
And this is Diana. I want to say thank you to the commenter for providing an example. This is really helpful when working with us as staff on providing comments on just, for example, I don't like that, or that doesn't work, but actually providing alternative language that may work. So thank you. We will be considering that.
As follow-up commentary from the same John Traskis, also, if you could better define what projects should be included on the MS4's construction inventory. Right now, there is no minimum size, and we see MS4s including very small projects such as under 10 square feet. It would be nice if the permit specified any soil disturbance projects over a certain size.
Thank you. That's another great comment, and a point that we've also been thinking about that. So thanks for pointing that out.
So, thank you, John, for your comments. So we have a question that is rather detailed from Harvey Oslick here in Sacramento, representing Wood Rogers Consultancy. So in section E12F, which details hydromodification management, part 2A currently states, open quote, post-project runoff shall not exceed estimated pre-project flow rate for the 2-year 24-hour storm, so on and so forth, end quote. This requirement is often interpreted as needing to not exceed pre-project instantaneous peak flow. Is this interpretation correct?
Yes, that's how I interpret it, and yes, we do plan to clarify that and basically add the word peak in there.
Okay, thank you, Paul. We have another question from Agnes Martelet, who we've heard from earlier, representing the city of Carmel by the Sea. So she wants to talk more about the post-construction requirements for street or sidewalks. She states, you mentioned that sections of streets or sidewalks that would be replaced as part of a project subject to the post-construction requirements would need to be included in the project square footage. However, if the roadway or sidewalk repair is done such that the grade or impervious area does not change, wouldn't that be considered maintenance?
So I think what we're trying to get at is that if that's being done by itself and the road grade isn't being changed and you're only working on the road, then that might be considered maintenance. But if it's part of a larger project, then we're thinking that we don't want that to get sort of not considered. This is a good point. I'll have to think more about this one in the future. And
Okay, and then a follow-up question that's related. It is difficult to build post-construction or best management practices for sections of roadway since road runoff from many sections is commingled in the gutter. Does the state board anticipate requiring best management practices associated with off-site improvements for private project to be sized to treat the entire volume of runoff coming to that section of roadway, or just the runoff generated by the pavement that is being replaced?
I think we were only proposing having you treat the runoff from the pavement that's being replaced.
Okay, so time check, it is 3:46 p.m., 14 minutes till the end of our scheduled workshop time, and I don't believe we're receiving any more questions or comments, so I'll pass it to Diana to close us out.
All right, very good, thank you. So next slide, please. All right, I see that. All right, so I want to thank everyone very much that participated, or even those of you that did not email anything, but you were listening and maybe gathering some thoughts for future discussions. At this time, you heard from all of Mary Boyd's Municipal Stormwater Permitting Unit staff on their thoughts and what they're pulling together to develop a draft permit. That's a lot of work. And during the development of the draft permit, we anticipate continuing to meet with representatives of the California Stormwater Quality Association, of schools, and of environmental groups and other parties to continue these really critical discussions. As staff develops a permit, and when we have a draft permit assembled, the State Water Board will issue that draft permit for a public comment period. Typically, the public comment period for a statewide permit, for a draft statewide permit, is 45 days. Depending on the time period or the requests or how complicated the permit might be and how much new material, we may put it out for a longer public comment period, but definitely a minimum of 45 days. During that public comment period, staff likes to ask our State Water Board to conduct a public hearing during that public comment period. The public hearing is a State Water Board public meeting in which, after staff provides a brief presentation of the draft permit that has been issued for public comments, the State Water Board does want to hear from stakeholders and interested parties directly. And so that's when you as a party, if you're interested, would speak directly to our State Water Board members during a publicly noticed meeting. Even though we are in our COVID pandemic, our State Water Board meetings are still continuing online. We don't know what the future holds. But however, our permit development process is going forward with that. So then after that public hearing, the public comment period comes to a close. And so what ends up being in the official record for the draft permit are the verbal comments that were voiced directly to the board members, as well as all the written comments. So it's very important to understand that as you work with us staff during the time period that we're developing the draft permit, that this is very good discussion and assisting us. However, if you want your comments to be in the official permit administrative record, you would have to participate either in the public hearing or submit public comments. Once the public comment period closes, as staff, we go through all the public comments, the verbal and the written public comments. We summarize them. We make sure the State Water Board members and our executive management understand and have access to all the public comments. During that time, if we have questions, we reach back out to the commenters. That's a very busy time period. We also look at what public comments we agree with, and we change, we revise the draft permit, and which public comments we may not agree with or we do not see as feasible at this time to implement, and we do not. As we revise draft permits, which we plan to present in front of our State Water Board for their consideration of adoption, we also provide written responses to all public comments. So there is a full agenda package that then proceeds to be presented in front of our State Water Board. That is the revised draft permit per the public comments and the full response to comments package. That is presented in front of our State Water Board at a publicly noticed board meeting to where our water board considers adoption of that draft permit. We always emphasize that our State Water Board considers adoption. It is not until our board rules that they're adopting the permit that any detail in that permit is final. Us water board staff have many times seen draft permits go in front of our state or regional water boards, and during those last hearings, details are modified before a board does finally adopt a permit. Next slide, please. All right, thank you. So once the permit is adopted, Kyle touched on this in his slide during the staff presentation. The permit itself will have an effective date. That effective date is when the permit becomes effective. The permit as a whole becomes effective. There's a lot of negotiation and thought placed into what that effective date should be. It's not necessarily the minimum 90 days that we have to at least have between the adoption of a statewide permit and an effective date. We also think through on how much time it would take the permittees to prepare and to come into compliance with the requirements, because once a permit is effective, basically the requirements of those permits are in effect. We have had comments from our morning workshop on someone requesting, can you make the effective date on the month of July after the permit's adopted? We take in all this input when it comes to the effective date, because we want to make sure not only we give enough time, but it is also a convenient time of year that the permittee can actually do the work to get themselves ready. And it's not during storm season, in which there's other more important work to be doing when it comes to stormwater management. And so we think through those factors. When a board reissues a permit, and when the State Water Board reissues a statewide permit, we always think of how do we provide a continuum when it comes to regulatory coverage for the existing enrollees. We do our best to make that easy. We do not look to have full application packages or a full process to be repeated. Our existing permit enrollees would basically be transitioned into the newly adopted statewide permit. As we are considering including schools and community colleges in this new permits, as well as any other new small municipalities, the permit itself will include the procedures on how to enroll in the permits and how much time the permittee has and a full-time schedule. With this said, when it comes to an effective permit, and as we're considering requirements for public school districts and community colleges, we are considering being creative and having the effective dates of the requirements for new permittees, such as schools, to be further into the 5-year permit term, to give them even more time, especially with the challenges that are currently taking place. So, so that's basically the permit development process. Next slide, please. I do want to thank everyone and emphasize that everything you heard from our staff presentation and from our discussions is exactly that, staff discussion and staff working on development of proposed requirements. Nothing we said is in stone until it goes through the full board adoption process. And so with that, I want to check in with Kyle. Kyle, we have 3 minutes. Did we receive any follow-up questions that we may be able to answer or comments we may be able to listen to?
Yes, I believe we might have received one more question. I'm trying to pull it up now. Okay, so this question is from Pete Riegelhuth at the Department of Transportation. So regarding the potential enrollment of schools as non-traditional MS4s, how will this incorporate the exclusion of bike and pedestrian facilities from post-construction stormwater controls? Most impervious surfaces for school are bike and pedestrian facilities. Typical stormwater pollutants are associated with cars and soil disturbance. Shouldn't post-construction stormwater controls be triggered by impervious surfaces provided for cars, not pedestrian and bike facilities?
We'll give you this one.
Okay. I was just going to say that while it's true that the cars might provide more pollutant generating activities that would be bad for the quality of the water, that the impervious surface, even if it's just for bikes and pedestrians, if it's not properly designed, could impact the quantity of water and cause, downstream erosion and other kinds of things like that from increasing the stormwater runoff.
Thank you. So basically what you're stating is stormwater pollution off of impervious surfaces goes beyond the impervious surfaces that are just used for cars, correct?
Yeah, and basically that there's sort of two sides of the reasons for regulating or for having post-construction requirements. There's stormwater quality, like picking up oils that cars are depositing, and then there's also stormwater quantity, like increased flood flows due to changing previously pervious surface into impervious surface.
Very good, thank you. Oh, I'm happy we were able to fit in that last question. So with that, once again, on behalf of State Water Board staff working on this permitting project, we want to thank you all for your time and your participation. And we look forward to just continued discussions on these very important issues. Have a good afternoon.